Welcome! I'm Jade of Jaded Reader, and today I'm going to be going over some of the books I've recently read. I have realized, first off, I do lots of monologues in the beginning of my videos, so sorry about that. And second, that I'm not very good at doing wrap-ups consistently. I think part of it is because I don't read a block of books each month and then go on to the next block. I have tried to figure out how to incorporate in filming at the end of the following month for the month before, but it's just getting too complicated, so I think I'm going to try out this format. It's a little bit more flowy, and I think that's going to be more my style. So I'm trying this out. If you absolutely hate it, let me know in the comments below, but I'm not going to be going in order from least to greatest amount of stars. I'm actually also just going to be doing books I read. Graphic novels will be in a separate video that hopefully will end up above in the next few days, and I'm just gonna talk about the books a little bit less structured. I'm going to not hold myself accountable to do one each month, as sometimes I read one book a month and other times I read 10 books a month, and that can really make a difference in how I'd like to format my wrap-ups. So they're not wrap-ups, they're recently reads. That's what you're stuck with for now. If it really does not jive with you, I'm not settled on this, I'm just trying it out. So yeah, let me know. Be honest, not too honest, but honest within reason, and I'll hear you out and we can kind of work this out, because I have not figured out wrap-ups. While I love talking about books in different capacities, I do think this is an important staple of my channel, and I'd like to get a handle on it. Monologue over, let's get into the books I've recently read. The first book I'm going to talk about has been on my mind a lot lately, and I just got it signed. That is Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tomi Adeyemi. This is the sequel to Children of Blood and Bone, and this was also one of my most anticipated reads of the year. I got this book as a Yule Christmas type gift, and I'll have the link for that vlog up above because I did read it throughout that time, and I feel like that vlog's time is ticking as about to be out of season. So in order to stay away from spoilers, I will be summarizing the first book in this series and then talking about my thoughts for the second. In the first book, Children of Blood and Bone, you have Zaylee, our fiery, gorgeous main character, who lives in the world of Aparecium, where there used to be a lot of different types of elemental magic, and that has been taken away. The current ruler has this entire society oppressed, and people are living without magic, but are also being treated differently because they once had magic. Tomi Adeyemi has talked about how Children of Blood and Bone was a way of her taking a stance on gun control and gun violence against people of color, and I absolutely loved Children of Blood and Bone. It's fantastic. It's definitely inspired by Avatar: The Last Airbender, and you can definitely see that throughout. There are many different little signs and symbols that aren't taken from Avatar, but definitely have that influence and feeling. Children of Blood and Bone was a absolute standout favorite of mine. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. I had read it when I had first started BookTube and could not wait for this release. Upon getting this book, I was immediately surprised at the size difference. You'll notice that Children of Blood and Bone is quite a bit larger than Children of Virtue and Vengeance, but I carried on. I didn't want to think about the fact that I was getting less of this world, and instead was just excited that I was getting any of it. But essentially, I'd say that that was kind of how I felt like the entire process was while reading it. It was constantly falling short of my expectations, but I was also continually fueled by the fact that I was back in this world, back with these characters, and it really took me some time to figure out where I stood with this book. I would say that Children of Virtue and Vengeance had some inconsistencies in character development that I just couldn't overlook, and a lot of the arguments and dialogue were just infuriating to me for all the wrong reasons. I felt like some of the plot could have been washed over, that some choices were simply made for plot reasons, and that while the action scenes were absolutely fantastic, it felt like they were constant waves of action without any forward momentum in the plot. I didn't want to say any of this. I wanted to get to the end and just have my mind completely turned around, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I still loved the action scenes as they came up. This book is beautifully written. Tomi Adeyemi truly does have a way with words, but I think that I'm going to have to say that this book book does indeed suffer from a middle book syndrome, which is what I'm finding more and more often with young adult books, and it's really, really frustrating for me because I would have much rather just taken a duology and had this book be this much wider with that much more plot, storyline, and character development. That was not the review I wanted to give, but it was definitely the review on my mind. So all in all, Children of Virtue and Vengeance for me is a 3.5 out of 5 stars. But you still have a nice little place on my shelf, and you're still signed. You're still beautiful. You're just a tad bit disappointing. Next up is not a highly anticipated release for me, but it was a highly anticipated read for a lot of individuals, and it definitely caught my attention in its constant discord on Twitter upon its arrival. Also is by one of my favorite authors, which made it even more appealing to me in finding out how I felt about it. So I ended up picking up Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I buddy read this with my bestie Rachael Marie at Rachael Marie's Book Journey, and I felt that we had really similar feelings throughout the book of just kind of going along and trying to figure out what was going on. First and foremost, let me talk about the plot to Ninth House, because I can honestly say I didn't really understand what this book was about going in, and I do feel a little bit more comfortable having finished it, but along the ride, I really was a little confused. So here is my best take at this summary. This follows our main character, Alex, as she is coming out of a traumatic situation that is very mysterious. She's recruited by some sort of society that works in conjunction with Yale University, and she has some sort of job specific to the fact that she can see and or communicate with ghosts. This society does have a way to see and communicate with ghosts, but it's complicated, and Alex can get straight to the point as she has always had a constant barrage of ghosts affecting her life in various ways, and now that she's joined the society, she can put that skill to use. This also follows a different perspective that takes place in a different timeline, and it was a character named Darlington. He is my favorite perspective by far. He is currently the ambassador of the society, and he works alongside the different frat houses that all have different magical abilities, and somehow that works into the fact that ghosts exist. I know that sounds really confusing, but that is my best take. There's magic and there's ghosts, and you're just kind of thrown in and having to gauge a lot out of context. I felt like that took something away from me, and I was continually playing catch up, which got really exhausting after a while. The end of this book really did sell it for me. A lot of things did fall into place in those last, I don't know, like 50 pages, and it really was something where I think a reread would benefit me greatly. I think that this might be a book worth rereading. As of right now, I'm giving it a 4 stars, and that's really tentative. It really slid under the radar as far as memorability went. I just remember being really confused and then pretty impressed and having fun talking to Rachael along the way. The trigger warnings surrounding this book are definitely warranted. This does have some really disturbing moments. I would say that most of the discord and conversation around this book centered around the fact that this book does have pedophilia and rape, and that is a very graphic scene that I don't think you can really avoid, as it is brought up several times by the main character in her perspective because she's dealing with that trauma herself. Another situation that I think should get a trigger warning that I haven't really heard about, there is a trigger warning for sexual assault under the influence. I don't know if this was dealt with correctly. I felt that the situation was kind of blown over, almost made light of in some situations, and was, dare I say, used as a plot device. I'm giving Ninth House a 4 out of 5 stars, not because I really enjoyed it, but because I did have a lot of thought-compelling conversations with Rachael surrounding this book. It definitely made me think and explore where I stand on some things, and once you pulled back all of the gritty, dark details that were happening, the plot was actually pretty good, and I didn't see the ending coming. It did make me want to read the second one, which to me seemed like a humongous feat considering how I felt about the book until the end. Next, I have The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. I buddy read it with Rachael. This was like our second buddy read in a row. Okay, so I'm gonna unpack this real dang quick. First off, 10,000 Doors of January is one of the most beautifully written books I think I've ever read. And I have the special edition of Strange the Dreamer for a reason. I'm always looking for the flowers. This was a beautifully written book. I really don't know how this is a debut novel. Alex Harrow has some hidden talent that they just decided to pop on out for this book. I don't know what to think except for to be impressed. So there's that. Second off, I'm only going to be giving you the summary and my review of the writing itself, as I feel like many areas in this book are not something I have a strong perspective on. So with that, The 10,000 Doors of January follows January Scholar, who is a foster child with a father. Her father is constantly out exploring on missions for a very rich man named Mr. Locke. Mr. Locke is the one that is essentially raising January, and so he sees her as his ward, his foster, and while January's father visits quite often, it is Mr. Locke who essentially she sees as raising her. So this book has a lot of tropes I very much so enjoy. It has portal magic as well as a book within a book, and this book within a book trope is done very, very well. So if you are a fan of that, I think you'll be a fan of this style. I felt absolutely riveted by both January herself as well as the story she was reading, and it all comes together so beautifully that I just was impressed. Once again, I'm gonna say impressed with this book. Now, to get into the parts that I don't really have a perspective on, January is a person of color, and she is growing up in the American South in the early 1900s. So January is constantly being treated differently. Others and herself refer to her as someone of mixed race or in between, and it is constantly brought up. There is colorism and colonialism in this. My reason why I'm putting this on your radar is because Alex Harrow herself is a white or white passing author, and I think it's important to know that this is not an own voices perspective. I'm going to leave that there, just putting it on your radar, as this is not a perspective I'm comfortable speaking for, but I do have two own voices reviews down below, one enjoying the book and one feeling uncomfortable with the book, and you can draw your own conclusions there or by reading the book yourself. Either way, I'm just giving you the information and you can do with it what you will. As far as trigger warnings go, of course there are trigger warnings for colorism, colonialism, as well as animal abuse, and I would also stick asylums on there, as there is a lot of gaslighting, and at one point a character is placed in an asylum, and I can imagine that being a triggering perspective if that's something that has been dealt with before. So if those are triggers that apply to you, keep them in mind. While this book is unbearably beautifully written and the plot was absolutely stellar, I did end up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and it's simply because while reading it, I did have a hindrance in trying to figure out where I stood, as I do feel that not having an own voices author write this book and write from January's perspective with the colorism involved made me feel uncomfortable, and it just ended up hindering the experience. In the end, I thought that it all felt unique. I'm so glad this book existed. I just had to read this book with so much caution and trying to be sensitive and thoughtful of other people that might be reading it, that it just ended up hindering my experience. That might not hinder your experience, and you can give it a higher rating, but I'm sticking with my 4-star. That feels like my honest answer. So there it is. The next book I read was via audiobook, and that was An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This was part of the FAVE Raves picks. FAVE Rave is like a friend group I have where we randomly kind of try and read everyone's favorites books in the group, and this was Kate at Chapter Kate's favorite book. I'll have Chapter Kate linked down below, as well as the rest of the FAVE Rave, so all of them will be linked down below. So The Unkindness of Magicians follows our main character, Sydney. Sydney almost comes out of nowhere, and she is this new girl in the Secret World Magician Society. There is a giant trial going on to see who's going to be the next strongest house. So each house has a family in it. Those family members send forward representatives or themselves to battle it out through these like magical duels, and the winning house gains glory. I kind of don't remember. I feel like they gain glory or like power, or they're in charge. And Sydney steps onto the block coming out as a strong contender. So she is not to be trifled with. Sydney is a badass woman who is here for a reason. Sydney has a stronger wealth of magic than other magicians, and that is because she is coming from pretty much the well of magic. So there is a secret house where magic is stored. That is where all the magicians siphon off their magic. Sydney is coming from that house. She has a wealth of power, and she is taking control of the city. I felt like the best way way I could describe this story was the Night Circus meets Gossip Girl. I end up talking about it a bit in my books I wish were standalones. The reason why I felt like I wished it was a standalone was because I really felt like this had a solid beginning, middle, and end, and the end felt pretty final to me, and I just felt like it wrapped up nicely. Things that I wish had been better were some of the trials, like the magic portion of this book I felt was kind of overrun by the Gossip Girl portion of this book. But I did feel that it had a lot of build-up and really cool moments. In fact, Sydney's debut is probably my favorite moment in the book. I was like, yes! And then all of the other moments I felt were kind of like I was on a roller coaster of anticipation, and then it would plateau each and every time. So that's something that really stood out to me. I ended up giving The Unkindness of Magicians a 3.5 out of 5 stars because I felt like it never reached its full potential, but I also am confused as to it being a first in a series now. I think it really did work as a standalone because it kind of made up for the fact that it was lacking in some of its story because there were things that needed to be faster paced to get an entire story told. Another book I'm really excited to talk about is The Last Wish. This is a prequel book for the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski, and this is a book I picked up after watching the entire first season of The Witcher. So I'm coming from the perspective of watching The Witcher and then reading these books. This is a series of short stories. So you have a short story, and then you have Geralt of Rivia, the Witcher, in the present, and then another short story, and he's reminiscing about these different short story moments while being healed in some sort of abbey type thing. But I really enjoyed this. I ended up buddy reading this with Ola at Ola Magic Reads, who is just a fantastic person and such a fun person to buddy read with. I always enjoy our conversations. It was really fun to read this book with her, but while Ola had not watched the Netflix series, I definitely was coming from a place where I was already very familiar with the world. The Netflix series does a really fantastic job. I have not played the Witcher games. My partner is very heavily involved with The Witcher 3. He's played it a lot and has read this book. It has his stamp of approval all the way through. Henry Cavill, who plays the main character, Geralt of Rivia, in the Netflix series, has also given his seal of approval as both a fan and the main character. So I feel like this is a world that's being very well taken care of by its fans, and I was really excited to enter it. The Last Wish follows Geralt of Rivia in kind of his early days and early explorations as a Witcher. A Witcher is kind of a demon slayer or demon hunter, but they are not well liked or favored. I felt like this series of short stories took care of a lot of different short stories that were in the Netflix series. I ended up giving The Last Wish a 4 out of 5 stars because I felt like the changes inside of the Netflix series were actually like spot on. I liked a lot more characters in the series than I did in the books. Characters were really well developed and great. It's also translated as it is originally in Polish. I just gave it a little bit of slack there, and I ended up really enjoying it. It felt like I got a whole bunch of little deleted scenes from the show, which I know is a pretty backwards way of thinking for me as far as like reading a book versus watching something, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to continue on to, I believe it's Sword of Destiny, which is also a prequel series. I still haven't gotten into The Witcher itself, and I'm trying not to be really impatient because I cannot wait for The Witcher to start back up again, and I'm reading these in order to kind of get ahead, and I still haven't gotten past what I've watched. So frustrating, but a great book. I could hear Henry Cavill's voice the entire time in my head, which was fantastic. So win-win. I finally finished the Arc of the Scythe series, which is Scythe, Thunderhead, and I have the Toll, but I don't have it physically. I listened to it on audiobook. I'm buying it physically eventually. I have to have all of these books on my shelves. They are my favorites. Let me talk about them. Hold on. If you don't know about the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman, I will give you an overviewing summary of the first book because this entire world really does take off, and I have to say this is probably one of my favorite worlds I've ever been in. So the first book, Scythe, takes place in a utopian or dystopian, depending on how you look at it, world in which the human population has conquered death, and we have an AI that is in control of our laws, our electricity, pretty much everything, and its name is the Thunderhead. While you have this AI controlling the world, it has not been able to control population growth. Because there is no more death, population has grown substantially, and with no other way besides pruning the population, scythes are humans' last major responsibility. The Order of Scythes is meant to be this really high honor. It's not like something dark and mysterious. It's supposed to be just the way that people die. There are different ways that people die. There's lots of trigger warnings for different ways people can die. I'll get into the trigger warnings later. Just keep that in mind. Death is very inevitable in these books. These books are about death. Scythes are the ones who decide who lives and who dies, and Citra and Rowan are chosen as Scythe apprentices under this very prestigious Scythe who is going to teach them the way in which a Scythe should kill gracefully. There were so many moments in this book where I was surprised, thrilled, and like terrified. I felt so connected to the world. I believed so much of the world. I really ended up trusting Neal Shusterman. I remember starting the second book and not knowing if I was going to be able to continue, as I felt this would have been such an amazing standalone. But after reading Thunderhead, I couldn't believe that anymore. I just needed more. And then I read The Toll. The Toll ended up just wrapping up things so nicely. I can say there were moments where I really was feeling doubt of whether I liked this book or not. I just decided that I was going to just fall back and believe in Neal Shusterman and believe in what he had written so far, and that he hadn't let me down. And I am so glad that I did, because I ended up finding that The Toll was fantastic. I cried. I felt things all throughout this series, but just having it come to such a beautiful and natural conclusion, it's just one of my favorite series ever, and definitely one of my favorite worlds. The world building in this series is fantastic. I have been in so many different fantasy worlds and so many different sci-fis and alternating universes, and I just found that I trusted this one. I understood where we were coming from, and it felt so great to feel so connected to a world that I wasn't actually in, that I find myself still sometimes reminiscing or missing the world and the way that it operated. So with that, I ended up giving all of these books 5 out of 5 stars. Scythe, Thunderhead, The Toll are all 5-star reads for me. I cannot clarify quite enough how strongly I feel about these books. I will go ahead and list some of the trigger warnings. However, just keep in mind death, gore, inevitable in these books. These are just triggers within that I found particularly triggering. And I was thankful enough to have someone point out one of the triggers to me in the first book, where it does have a mass shooting and suicide. I do have my wrap up for the Scythe linked up above, and that will have specific trigger warnings for a chapter because it is avoidable. I didn't read that chapter and it did not hinder my experience whatsoever. It's not referred back to really. You can literally cut out that chapter and pick right back up where you left off. So if school mass shootings and suicides are triggers for you, then go ahead and you can check out that video and it'll show you where to skip. I will say that there are less triggers that I can think of in Thunderhead. I felt like Thunderhead was what a middle book should be, and that was a really great opening point and trajectory forward into the last book, Toll. If I was to really simplify it, I would say that what this is targeting is mass murder and what is wrong with it. It's very challenging of that subject. So if it's something you feel strongly about, I highly recommend this book. If it's something that upsets you when you hear about it, then I would say avoid it. There is one scene that I did really truly find completely disturbing. It's quite disturbing. I don't know how quite to label a trigger for it. Triggers are hard, man. This trigger in particular, because I don't know, like, I don't know what that is. I would just say it's a disturbing scene where it's not necessarily gore based, but it's almost mentally disturbing. Like, I felt like I was going to throw up when I was reading the scene. So if that's something like where you're like, I don't like disturbing things, that's what I would look out for. Not necessarily a trigger, just keep in mind there is a super disturbing scene. If you've read Thunderhead before, I'm pretty sure you know the scene. It would have to do with decapitation and reconstruction of bodies. Hopefully that's vague enough. Real sorry, guys. Great series. Then finally leading into the Toll. The Toll is more of the same. You have the perspective of someone who commits mass murders. While it's highly challenged, it can be really scary because it's dealing with a topic where you're in this utopian or dystopian world, but this is something that's going on in our world today. If it's something that's upsetting to you, while it is challenged, it's still in there. So I would just keep that in mind. The other thing I could say is that the only way a Scythe can die is by gleaning themselves. Because they are immortal, they choose to glean themselves in various ways. It's up to them, but it is technically considered suicide. Suicide is a huge trigger for me. I was not triggered by it, as the way it's done just fits into the society really well, and it just doesn't register that way. Sorry that was such a long part of this review. The Scythe series is really an important part of my favorite shelf, and I'm glad that I gave it the time I did, because now you know how strong I feel about it. I'm strong enough to talk about it for 18 minutes. Can't wait to edit that down. Okay, I am done. These were my most recent reads. Again, I will be having another recent reads for my graphic novels, so go ahead and look out for that. I will try and double back to this video, as I know this video will be coming out first, and link it up above. So if you're seeing this a few days late, weeks late, months late, will this still be watched? Don't think so. Then you can go ahead and click on that above. I'll try not to forget about you. But otherwise, I would love to know, what are some of your favorite series of all time? What makes them so fantastic? Is it the world building, the characters? What really brings it up a grade for you and makes it something you can just continue to talk about? I have found that anytime someone has read Scythe, I want to speak to them about it. I really want to talk about it all the time. And I have had some people tell me that they didn't like Toll, and I'm like, tell me more. Why? Because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I didn't find it pandering or anything like that. I felt like once I got to the end it was necessary. I'm still talking about it. I'm so sorry. Tell me more about you. Tell me what your favorite books are. Regardless of whether you enjoyed this or not, I hope you're enjoying the sun or more stars wherever you are. And until next time, bye! Short of my Okay, Death Note. You're not haunted. You're fine. Like, it slid. Ooh, I wasn't trying to. The 10,000 Doors of January follows. How did I forget? Rachel's gonna watch this and she's gonna be like, again? I forgot the main character's name, and I don't know how this keeps happening. That's twice now. I feel like I need to see a doctor. Take it all in. I'm done. I'm not talking about this book for a while. We're just friendly book people of BookTube, but we talk. I should come up with a better way of describing the FAVE rave. What would that be called? Head dysplasia? A secret house, a dark house, a shadow house. I don't remember the name of the house. Can you tell? I have been talking for a long time, and I didn't have that many books to review. Oh shit! I forgot about The Witcher. We'll just edit it, and only the people who stay through the bloopers will know I forgot about The Witcher and The Unkindness of Magicians. Holy